Okay. This is Ben Sulsky coming back for part 2 of my 510 6-max zoom video. No limit hold'em zoom video. In part 1, I sort of introduced myself because it was my first video for Run It Once and got into the action. I'm not sure how many parts this video series is going to be now because I have 75 minutes, I believe, of footage recorded, and I got through 5 minutes in a 50-minute video the first time. So we'll see how that goes. The thing is, there's a lot of really great hands towards the end of the video, so I might use a lot of the footage. There's a lot of fun hands. As far as that video, I don't have any reads on anybody aside from the fact that I know that most of these guys are good players. I think there's a couple fish in this Zoom player pool, which is why it's running. But most of the regs are really tough, really good, long time 6-max regs. So, in this video series, my plan was to kind of give you guys a sense of my game, a sense of how I break down hands, how I think about them, in sort of a qualitative sense of me just having a conversation, talking about things. And then later on in other videos, we'll take a look at the math behind some of these decisions. I'm just kind of sketching the considerations you want to think about when you're making a decision in a hand. And I suppose if I had to pick a theme last video, it would be that I wanted to stress the fact that when you're reading ranges in 6-max, you obviously want to think about how players' pre-flop ranges hit certain boards and how those two ranges interact. That's sort of like what happens when you start to think about ranges. But one sort of feature that I wanted to draw your guys' attention to that I think is maybe overlooked is that when you see a board where the cards where the board isn't connected by the player's offsuit combos, that means that they'll have a lot of misses on that board, more than they would in a heads-up game or more than they would in a board where those offsuit combos paired or flopped gutters or things like that. And so I just very quickly ran a few numbers on that just to sort of quantify those things a little bit for you. So this is the theory section of the video. And we're going to continue to talk about this a little bit throughout this video. So I made this little notepad document right here. And this is just, so this first section here is just raw frequencies. So if you have 100% of hands that are playing a pot, this is how they'll break down. So you'll be, I clearly miscounted this because it sums to 103%. So I think the suited combos are a little bit less. Actually, let me recheck this. Go into Card Runners EV. This is how you can figure this out yourself if you want. Clear. Go for suited. Oops. Highlight here. So this is correct. So 23.5% of hands are suited. These are not things that I think you have to memorize. It's just in the interest of making the video complete, I decided to talk about them a little bit more precisely. And then 70.6% of hands are offsuit, and 6% are paired. So, basically, that's the breakdowns you have, more or less. So you have about, given you just have a random range that's not modified by any preflop considerations, so if you had 100% hands, you're going to have about 2.7 offsuit combos for every suited combo of a given holding. So there's going to be 2.7 times as many combos of king-queen offsuit as of king-queen suited. And then the pairs are a little bit trickier because pairs are, all 6% of pairs are in lots of ranges. So the ratio of pairs to non-pairs gets changed a lot more as ranges get wider or narrower. And then this is just an example of a tighter range. This is a button range that sums to 49% of hands. That's like a fairly aggressive button stealing range. And in that situation, you're going to have 16% of hands suited, 27% of hands off and 6% are going to be pocket pairs. So that's kind of ratios you're looking at. This part isn't actually that important. I just wanted to look at the sort of base rates of suitedness and unsuitedness. And this is the important part. So, right, so it's about 2.7 to 1. My math was slightly wrong, so I don't know what I did. It's about 2.7 to 1 suited to offsuit. But the key is that, so if we're looking at some board, and in the last video, that board was the deuce 7 board, as well as a few other boards. If you were looking at some board, and the offsuit combos are not in our opponent's range, and the suited ones are, or vice versa, the ratio is 1 to 2.8 of those boards. So you can basically say, so like on the deuce 7 board, there are basically no deuces in either player's range, and the 7 is in both players' range, particularly in position's range, but it needs to be discounted heavily because of this. And so, as a general rule, when cards miss the offsuit portions of a preflop range, they're poorly represented post-flop, and you can treat them more like blanks than you would before, especially if it's the flop and there hasn't been any post-flop betting yet. So it helps you, this is like sort of a trick to help you plan your post-flop strategy better. I will continue to talk about this a little bit as the video goes on, and I'll see what the action brings us. This is like a loose open with 8-9 of hearts. You don't have to do this. You can do it if you want. It might be bad, I don't know. Coffee. I mean, like, I called this bet. Like, I don't think that matters much either. It's like I know a lot of people are going to see this call and be like, oh, it's bad, that's spewy, blah, blah, blah. But I think that, like, a hand like 8-9 suited is going to be, like, on the one hand, it's going to be dominated by hands like 10s plus. Sure. On the other hand, his 3-bet for value range is definitely not going to include 10s. Or it shouldn't include 10s, maybe it does. It shouldn't include jacks really either, and queens would be somewhat marginal. But even say it includes jacks. You know, if I'm playing ace-jack offsuit, that's going to be dominated just as often. And if his 3-betting range starts at queens, then king-queen offsuit is just as dominated too as 8-9, basically. I mean, not quite, because it has the overcard, but they're both dominated. And 8-9 of hearts is less dominated by ace-king, and it can make some deceptive hands and some good implied odds. So I tend to favor suitedness and sort of connectedness and things like that against tight ranges a bit more than most. But again, this isn't it's not a huge consideration. I believe I ended up check raising here, which I think is pretty good. At least okay. Yeah, this is sort of a tricky spot because it's going to get kind of technical pretty quick, and I haven't been over it that closely in No Limit for a while. But I suppose what's going on here... Okay, so combos-wise, we should put the in-position 3-better on queens plus ace-king, roughly, and bluffs. Bluffs-wise, he can have a hand like I have. He can have like 9-8 suited. He can have like 8-7 suited, 7-6, whatever. He can have like a king-queen offsuit type hand sometimes. I've seen guys 3-betting those because they think that they're not quite good enough to call with, and so they 3-bet them to block some of the kings and queens hand from under the gun. He might have that sort of hand. He also might have a suited ace. Those are kind of the bluffing hands in his range. My range, on the other hand, I'm probably 4-betting aces, maybe kings, maybe ace-king suited, maybe not, and some bluffs. Jacks and 10s are just never getting 4-bet for value here. So I flop a lot of sets relative to his range. That's good. I also flop a lot of nothing relative to his range. Like, I have a lot of 9s through 7s, maybe even pocket 6s. Oh, of course, that's a set. Probably fold those, mostly. I have some 9s through 7s hands. I have some suited Broadway hands, which flop pairs and gutters. For pairs, we're looking at ace-10 suited and ace-jack suited primarily. Also king-jack suited, like, so some suited hands, which are going to flop pairs. I'm generally going to be folding the offsuit combinations pretty frequently because I want to have some sort of semi-bluffing potential, which is going to, like, that extra 5% hitting a flush, and not to mention just the playability of it, matters a lot when my equity against the top of his range might be as low as 18% in the first place. So, I need that extra 5% is like, an extra almost third equity bonus. That's a big deal in a spot like this. Now, so I'm still looking at this board, and I'm trying to figure out what to do. So it's like I have these pairs. I can't really call 9s on the flop. So we can just, wipe that from our minds. I mean, the thing is, just every single hand in his value range is just crushing me, when I have 2 9s. I mean, ace-king is just going to still be able to barrel me off so frequently. And then, any of the suited stuff he 3-bet pre is picking up backdoor flush draws a lot, which it's barreling. And it has a gutter a lot, which it might be barreling off with. And I just think that a hand like 9s is just, calling $90 on the flop and just folding like every turn, and the turn's just getting barreled too often. Or it's going to go check, and I'm going to end up check folding the river because he's trapping me. And I think that happens a lot, actually. I think a lot of really good players are doing that these days because a lot of people are floating hands like ace-queen and like king-queen on the flop and then bluffing the river. Now, I'm still figuring out what to do here. So, So every time we have a set, we can't really, we also have Jack-10 suited here, which is whatever. Jack-10 suited is definitely going to check raise flop. But we can't just go completely insane when we have a set. Otherwise, our range is going to be capped at like ace-jack suited or queens when we check call. And so much of our opponent's range is going to be ace-king, aces, or kings that I think we're going to do pretty badly calling down. Also, we have these tweener hands like king-queen and queen-9 suited maybe, although I would fold that pre. And like 9, and like obviously like 9-8 suited and things. So we have, and like ace-queen certainly. So there's these tweener hands that flop some stuff. But both players hit this board so hard that going crazy on a semi-bluff is sort of unattractive because we're just going to get called and jammed on by aces and kings and queens and floated by ace-king quite a bit. And he might have king-queen himself. So the strategy that I was executing on this board, I suppose, was one where I'm check-raising flop sometimes because I feel like I have quite a few combos of 2 jacks and 2 10s. And I have some combos like queens that can call down and defend me okay against aggression. And then I also have some hands like ace-queen suited with a backdoor flush draw that cover some of the cards and improve against some of his hands. So I think that I cover this board well enough that I can develop a check-raise range on the flop. But the problem is, a hand like king-queen, I don't like check-raising that often, especially without backdoor flush draw, although I'm probably folding king-queen offsuit. Actually, I'm definitely folding king-queen offsuit pre. I guess I would mix it up with king-queen with a backdoor flush draw. I think we need some of that in our calling range, definitely, because it's just going to play so well when an ace hits. He's going to be barreling that card a lot. I think this 9-8 suited hand is pretty nice. I mean, obviously, the queen is a little bit of a sketchy card in some ways, because there's a lot of ace-king combos, and aces and kings obviously have outs against me. So the queen's a bit sketchy. But that being said, I like my line here. So I decided to check raise because I'm like, okay, I think I hit this board well enough that I can sometimes fast play my nut hands. And I'm trying to figure out which bluffs and semi-bluffs to add to that check raising range. And I decided 9-8 suited is a pretty darn good candidate because first, when the turn comes down to 7, I think that, like, I don't think he's jamming over my flop check raise that often with aces or kings, although I might be wrong. I feel like he's mostly going to call those and let me barrel off. So I think I usually realize my equity. If he shoves the flop here, I just have to fold. It's such a disaster to be up against ace-king in this situation with my 9-8 of hearts. So as a semi-bluff, this hand is effective, but it's not extremely strong, where it's like a disaster to be folding it. But it's obviously pretty bad when he rejams on me. But the cool thing about this hand is if he calls me and the turn's a blank, like basically if the turn's any card 6 through 2, I think I have a really nice jam spot, because he should be floating me sometimes with ace-king and king-queen, and I think that I'll maybe even ace-queen suited if he somehow 3-bets that, which he probably doesn't. And I think that I'll get turn folds from that region of his hand range quite a bit with 9-8 of hearts, and that's kind of a big victory for me to get folds. So I'm not completely in love with this play, but I think that I mean, obviously if I want to check raise a set, and if I want to check raise Jack 10 suited, which I do, I want to check raise some sets. I'd probably check raise 2 jacks and 2 10s sometimes. Anyway, I think I obviously need to add some semi-bluffs, potentially some bluffs. I think this is one of the hands that it's best to add. That's sort of how I was constructing my range. That being said, this is a spot where like ranges are narrow enough that I could probably solve the spot with some precision if I wanted to go look at it further. I'm not going to do that right now. So he's tanking. And calls. And I think that this turn, it's very clear. So, I left myself a pot-sized bet. I think a pot-sized bet is a really ideal bet size to have on a turn like this. Again, I was sort of targeting the 6 through deuce region as one to shove all in on. I think I'd also be shoving, ace of hearts and king of hearts, I'm shoving. I think the offsuit ones I'm probably not shoving. I think that he'll just have too much. I suppose I can still shove. The offsuit ace and king are interesting cards because, again, I'd like to look at this in a bit more depth in another video or something, because he's going to have kings and queens a lot. And I think he's going to be in a genuinely tough spot with ace-king. I don't know if he ever actually... I think he probably never actually folds ace-king because he can just put me on ace-queen and call. But against a really good player, it might be an interesting spot. I'd probably just still end up shoving an offsuit ace or king and hoping to get a hero fold, but really just trying to make myself tougher to play against because I expect to get called by ace-king or even kings or queens almost every time. So I doubt I would actually find the check fold there, but it might be the best play, or at least the highest EV in a vacuum play. So here I shove, blah blah blah. I think this is very standard shove here, and I do think this puts him in a tough spot. Like if you're villain and you're playing against an under the gun guy who raises, calls a 3-bet, and check raises you on Jack 10-6, and he shoves the ace of hearts turn for pot. I mean, I really think that you're going to be feeling the heat with a hand like ace-king or ace-queen. I mean, especially ace-king in kings and queens. So I do think this is a good line by me. Of course, he was bluffing pre-flop with king-queen, and that's not the hand I wanted to see. But I don't think that makes my play bad or anything. I mean, I think that there's plenty of offsuit aces and suited aces, and not really offsuit aces, but there's plenty of suited aces and suited connectors are out of his range by now. But just so much of his range is not king queen there. I mean, a lot of players just don't even 3-bet bluff that pre. So I think that's sort of whatever. I called that 3-bet because it was relatively small, and then I just check folded that board. I think that's very standard. I think I mean this flop peel is very standard with the Jack 6, and he checks the turn. I'm gonna call the 3-7 to clubs. I might end up 3-betting that occasionally. That's okay too. I tend to just sprinkle in some of these weaker suited hands into my 3-betting range occasionally. More often if I have a kind of read. On the right table, I turn the straight. This is a spot to play a mixed strategy where you bet some straights and check some straights. Checking is actually an underutilized, sort of underrated play here on the turn. Because if you check back here, you'll induce check-raise bluffs on the river from basically air hands. Occasionally. This isn't the best spot to check back the straight, because there's not that many hands that I play this way pre that... Well, there's some, but there's not as many hands that turn 2-pair, and that are really, or big 1-pair, that are going to be really good... really, really good thin value bets on the river. So the more thin value bets I have on the river, the more often I want to check back the straight, because when I have the thin value bets in my range, I induce the check-raise bluffs, and then I can pick them off with my straight. That doesn't happen as much on this card. Now, I think as a general rule, though, I mean, against most players, just betting is fine, and you don't need to think about it that much. And the reason is just that, if he has 2-pair, he's not going to fold. He's going to be like, okay, you might be bluffing. I have 4 outs to the nuts. I call. If he's a flush draw, he's probably betting himself. If he has 1-pair, he's probably check folding, unless it's a king. If it's ace-king, it's definitely going to check call, I would guess. If it's, if he has a set, he might bet it himself sometimes, or he might check call. As far as I'm concerned, what's my bluffing range here? Well, I mean, obviously a hand like 8-7 is just always barreling off. I think this card is good enough for my range that I can take maybe a few bottom pair hands that don't have anything going on and bluff with them. I think that's okay. I'm not really a fan of floating flop with a lot of suited aces here. I think you need a gutter, really, to pull that off. So I think this is a spot where, I think it's good to mix it up with your straights, because I'm going to have a lot of Jack X combos, just relative to other things. Because I'm going to have, with the small raise size pre, I'm going to have hands like, Jack 6 offsuit, Jack 5 offsuit, all kinds of hands like that are going to call flop. And so I'm going to have so many straights on the turn. I'm also going to have so many 1-pairs. I'm going to have 10-5 suited, 10-7 offsuit, 9-7 offsuit, etc., that I think it's a good idea to just mix up the straight combo. So maybe you just make some kind of ratio in your head and follow that out. Maybe check suited 1-card straights that are spades or hearts, or spades or hearts and diamonds, or whatever mix you decide to go for. Make some kind of split there. Or if you get even any kind of read on the speed at which he checked, how he plays, blah blah blah, then you can kind of exploit one way or the other here. But I do think it's a pretty good bluff spot for him if the turn goes check-check, and he gets the river, because my range is going to contain so many Queen X, 10X, 9X hands that I think that he can make a pretty credible bluff on the river, representing a hand as weak as 2 aces or ace-king. So I do think that's an interesting spot where some people would miss the way that turn should play. I decided to just bet. I think that's standard and good. I'm just sort of maybe some of these players aren't quite tough enough to warrant a lot. I think the sizing here is fine. 70 to 77 is whatever. Yeah, if it was bigger than that, I think it might start to be a mistake. I think that's just that's fine. So I check called the small flush draw on 4-4 king. I think that's very standard and good. On the ace of clubs, my range is going to change substantially, I would say. Basically, I'm going to have ace high on the flop, but I think that some guys just peel almost any ace high. I need some sort of backup to go with my ace high. I need a backdoor flush draw, or I need I mean, the ace of clubs is a big one. So if I'm in position and I see the ace of clubs fall, I'm going to barrel that ace a lot more often than any other ace, because I'm going to expect my opponent to have fewer aces in his range, because most of the aces he calls the flop away that contain the ace of clubs. So this is actually a good bluff spot for you if you're Dennis 77709. I don't think he'll pick up on that. I think he'll just see it as an ace, as a suited ace, not really put together the pieces here. But it would be a good bluff spot. For that reason, I'm going to have to call with a few more kings than I normally would. A few more like king 8 with 8 of clubs, that kind of thing is going to be calling for sure. And I'm also going to call with my small flush here and expect to pick up a lot of river barrels, because my range is quite weak on the turn. That's sort of my play. I think that's going to make the most money, or at least make as much money as check raising. So he checks back. I don't know if I expect him to realize that that's as good of a barrel spot as it might be, at least against me. So I expect him to have some kings. I mean, a king is a really likely hand here. A little bit less likely, but still possible, is a hand like 10s through queens that, like, quote, value bet the flop, and then decided, oh, there's an ace now. I have this, I have that. I'm not going to bet again because I don't want to narrow his range more, and then gets to the river and has to make a decision. That's possible. But really, he has a lot of bluff catchers in his range relative to normal, bet call, check check, river situations, and mostly they're kings. I think that my range here is going to contain a lot of hands which can find a bluff. And the reason is that his range is less polarized than normal because the flop top pair got, quote, counterfeited by the ace in the turn, and so he's going to play it as a bluff catcher on the river. And I have a lot of weak flop check calls, and I have some turn flushes and turn aces that I can now use to push him off of those kings and off of those mid-pair hands. So I'm going to probably take hands like pocket sixes and turn them into a bluff on a river like this. And I'm also going to bet pretty large because I expect him not to be slow playing a lot of flushes and a lot of big aces, like to this line. So I think I make it a little bigger. Yeah. So I decided to just make a pretty big bet. I think that's good. Threes will be getting raised. Oh, I'm cracking my back. I'm subletting a house in Vancouver right now, and my work chair is just brutal. So I've been playing and standing up a lot. I'll rewind a little bit. Board queen, queen, ace. I check. I think the flop is fine. Turn ace. I now have 3 high. It's a very standard bluff. Actually, let me recheck that hand. Just go through this one more time. Man, these zoom hands move fast. Yeah. So I check back the flop. I mean, the reason is just that, he's going to have a lot of aces. He's going to have, I will get called here by king high with a gutter sometimes, but I'm not even doing very well against that hand, especially when you consider the fact that he can bluff me on the river and play a polarized range on the river against me. So I can't bet here. The question is whether I want to bluff. If I do bluff, since I have so much equity, I have to consider bluffing quite a few streets. And so my preference was to check back, show down my hand on cards which are pretty favorable for pocket threes, and then bluff on ones that weren't. And then I hit a gin bluff card. So I expect to get called by a hand like king jack here, maybe not. But he's going to have a lot of hands that are just going to be check folding, like he might bluff with like jack 10 or something. I have no idea. Once he does check, this is really just like a spot where it's like I have enough aces and enough pocket king type hands. That's just a spot where I'm this far down in my range with so few, without any redraws. It's just a very easy bluff. Especially given I have nut hands in my range. This is I'd say pretty darn standard check back, or it should be. I mean, if you continuation bet this hand, it's a pretty tricky thing to get away with, because once you get called, you're probably flipping versus his hand range. Like, you're ahead of ace jack, and you're ahead of 9-8, and you're ahead of. I mean, you're kind of doing okay against a hand. I mean, you're obviously crushing 10-9, and you're doing kind of okay against a hand like Ace 10. You're doing pretty well against King Jack. The point being, there's quite a few hands in his calling range which we do pretty well against. There's also a lot of hands which we do badly against, namely any queen, any bigger tens isn't a huge deal because of our gutter, but there's just a lot of hands that we're doing badly against too, and especially because the board's going to come out dirty for us a lot. We're going to end up folding, and we can't exactly double barrel or triple barrel this hand because we're just going to make his range stronger and stronger, and we're going to risk way too much money. So I think it's just a very standard check behind and call 1 or 2 bets. Definitely call 1 bet, decide for the second. I'd check back the turn here again. This is a spot where, I think I can value bet the turn, but I definitely can't value bet 2 streets unimproved. I think it's a spot where I want to keep some of the draws and some bluff catchers in my checking range that I can comfortably call a river bet, which is what I'm going to do. And I'm never folding here. I'm just sort of thinking about things, and he has a very reasonable hand. Shark Nebula, a fellow Run It Once coach. So this Queen 9's, I think, a very standard fold. I don't think a lot of people peel there, but if you do peel there, you should probably fold. Again, this is... I get a chance to tie it in. If you're going to make a light sort of out of position float peel because you want to cover maybe certain board cards, because you do want to have if it comes 10-3 deuce, you don't really want to have a board card where you never have anything. You don't really want to, if a queen comes down and you never have a queen, that's probably not good for you. You can probably mix in, one combo of queens into your check calling range or some queen X hand. But if you're going to mix those combos in, you should always just have a backdoor flush draw, especially if the combos should be infrequently represented in your range and they're both offsuit and suited. Pick the suited combo. That's what you float with. I think this is a very, 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 very standard 4-bet. So I'm just going to 4-bet. I think I actually made this a little bit too big. I might have even 4-bet to 220. I think I 4-bet to like 180 or something, which is that I didn't fully appreciate just how small E. Doyler's 3-bet was. Like, I think I did, but maybe I was thinking about something else, and I was just like being kind of sloppy. I think I should make it about 160 here. I think I made it 180. Might even made it more. It's actually a little bit awkward for Ace-King. We're still going to have to 4-bet call it off, I think. But it's kind of close, Ace-Queen would be a mistake to 4-bet call here, like a pretty big one. I think Ace-King is borderline. I think Queens is relatively borderline. I think Jacks is probably a mistake to 4-bet call here. I do believe... So I made it 180. I guess that's okay. Yeah, like I said, I think 160 is better. I think 180 is a little bit too much. And by the way, as advertised, I will have offsuit jacks in my range against a min-range from the small blind. I actually used to play like almost any 2 cards here. I've tightened up a little bit. I think if the small blind's any good, they can make it, negative EV for me to play like Jack Deuce. But I think that Jack 5 is like, speculative, but okay. I can squeak by, especially if I think I play, a little bit better post-flop. One other point is that I think, and this used to be more true. This has nothing to do with the hands. This is just a general sort of theory point. I think that it used to be in the past, people had this impression. I don't know if anyone listening still does, but if you do, I want to talk about it. I think people had the impression that if you were going to play a weak hand in a marginal spot, you had to do something with it later to make it plus EV for yourself. So like if I said, I'm going to call a raise with Jack 5 offsuit there, that means that I'd have to like bluff raise 7-4-4 without anything in order to get him off a hand, in order to make my Jack 5 offsuit a plus EV preflop call, in order to like make it pay for itself. Now, that's true in one sense, but it's not really true in the important sense. So, the sense in which it's true is that if I have an exploitative read on someone, or if I just have a good idea how they play and how to combat that, which is what exploitation is. If I have that kind of read, then I might be able to play hands that are below my normal defending threshold for that spot. So say I think it's plus EV for me to defend Jack 5 offsuit or better against a min raise from the small blind. But say I have a read or series of reads that he c-bet and folds to a raise on paired boards like 85% of the time, and I have a really significant sample. Then I'm like, okay, well that can't be right. That's not a good strategy for him. And I say, okay, well, you know what, now instead of Jack 5 offsuit, I can play Jack 4 offsuit. But it's like, I'm still going to be playing Jack 5 offsuit in all my other hands by bluff raising the paired boards. They're just going to be more plus EV than they used to be. And that means that a slightly weaker hand is going to be plus EV too, because of my read. But it's not like you need to take the hands that are weaker than average and do something crazy with them to make them plus EV. Because if you know how the guy plays and he does something exploitable, the weaker hands are just going to be plus EV. It's just going to happen. You don't need to make something happen. And the important way, and I've already sort of been suggesting this, in which that's not true, in that you have to make weak hands plus EV by bluffing or something, is that I think that a hand like Jack 5 offsuit is just good enough to play. And the reason is because I'm getting an incredible price. I'm getting 3-1, and I have position. And there's only one player left in the pot, and so he's opening a wide range. And I think that given all of those considerations, I can just defend Jack 5 offsuit. And my plan is just to flop a Jack, a 5, a gutter, a flush draw, or have him check. And those things sort of make up that 25% of the pot I have to win to make my call break even. And I don't need to do anything fancy. And doing the fancy stuff just makes Jack 5 offsuit lose. It doesn't pay for itself. It just makes you lose money. So don't do it. Just fold if you don't think that the hand is good enough on its own merits. King 9's an open, Ace 7's an open. What am I going to do? I think I'm just going to fold. Like, okay, that's an okay 3-bet bluff spot because King 10 suited, I probably call. Therefore, King 9 suited is, a pretty good 3-bet bluff. But it just happens to be the case that if you sum up all of the hands which are right below your call threshold, so say like I call with Ace Queen. So it's like, okay, King Queen offsuit is right below my call threshold. King 9 suited is right below my call threshold. Say Queen 10 suited is right below my call threshold, or Queen 9 suited, one of the two. And you sum up all those different things that are like not quite good enough to call, you're just going to get way too many bluffs. So you just have to pick some of them to bluff with, and sometimes you fold. Or just pick some hands that you're always sort of bluffing with, which is fine too. It's a little bit tougher to play against if you mix up your bluffing range a little bit more. But suited aces are just so powerful and no limit that just bluffing suited aces is pretty strong. Ace 5 suited particularly is like kind of a special hand with a lot of equity against very tight ranges. Won the blinds. Crack my back. Oh. I think if I had a standing mic, you guys would have heard that one. That was a good one. Okay, so it's like a couple things. Ace 3 offsuit's just good enough to raise from the small blind. Today, I decided to play a raise or fold strategy out of the small blind. Specifically a 3x or fold strategy. That's fine. It's also possible to play a limping strategy, and I've played that in other videos. I tend to favor the limping strategy in anti-games and favor the raising strategy in non-anti-games. I also tend to favor the raising strategy as I play lower stakes. The reason for that is just that there's more rake. There's quite a bit of rake in limp pots, so I tend to try not to get into limp pots. And I tend to just generally make my raise sizes pre-flop a little bit bigger, at least until I get to a 3-bet, because the rake is significant. Especially if you're, don't play as many hands, you're not Supernova or Supernova Elite, that's something you need to think about. Okay, that's fine. Ace-3 is good enough to raise. Especially we have a discount on raising. We already have the small blind in. If you're folding Ace-3, that's just too tight. You need to play that hand. Second, this King-8 hand is definitely strong enough to peel pre-flop. I think it's just not a 3-bet. I think that's very standard. On Jack 9-5, I decided to check back. I think that's whatever. I'm not sure which play I like better here. There's a lot of unknowns in terms of which play is going to make more money. I would say Jack 9-5 is kind of in the middle for c-bettableness. There's a lot of hands in his range. There's some hands in his range that he might be uncomfortable c-betting here, like Ace-3 offsuit, for example, is kind of scary to c-bet, and Jack 9-5 is going to get floated a lot. Things like that. Now, Ace-3 suited, on the other hand, backdoor flush draw, he's probably going to be able to c-bet that. He also is, it's pretty easy for him to set up a check calling range on this board. There's a lot of hands that sort of medium strength that he can mix in there, like pocket 10s, 9-8 suited, etc., etc. I think in hindsight, I like a bet a little bit better on this board with the intention of barreling quite a bit. I mean, this board hits my range pretty well. That being said, my range is kind of weak because I'm in position and, it's a small blind versus big blind situation. The big blind's calling range is going to be quite a bit wider because I have a discount. I already have a blind in and I'm in position. So my range is just going to be weak by default. But I still think I like barreling off with this hand. I mean, barreling the flop, and then I would certainly barrel this turn. But I check back, that's okay. Turning the double gutter. The spread out double gutter. I have all ends of the spectrum. I like the spread. I got everything covered here. If he checks, I'm obviously going to bet. I think that's just very standard. The reason why it's standard is because pocket 6s through 2s fold every time. And they have a lot of equity against my hand. Ace high folds every time. It has a lot of equity against my hand. And my hand has tons of equity against everything that he calls with. If he has 10-7, I have a lot of equity, and there's also some cards that I can bluff on. So I think it's just, I don't even think I need to talk about that anymore. I think it's just very, very standard. And then also, there's nut hands in my range. I would probably almost always bet 8-7 on the flop. So I think that Queen 8 probably bets a lot in the flop too. So it's not like I have a ton of straights, but my range is protected by 2-pair. Specifically, Jack 10 probably bets flop quite a bit, but not always. But not necessarily always. I also might sometimes check back a gutter on the flop, but let's not get into that. But my range is, protected by 2-pair, and it's not like his range is particularly strong anyway, given he is checked twice and he is already raising from the small blind. So I think that, it's just a very, very standard bet in the turn. And certainly I have a lot of pair plus flush draw hands that I can float a check raise with. So here I go. I bet. I think I bet pretty big. I think this is a spot where my bet size doesn't actually matter that much as long as it's nothing outlandish. Well, okay, whenever I say my bet size doesn't matter that much, that's assuming that I'm picking more or less one bet size in my range, which I am in this spot. If you want to develop multiple bet sizes, then you can have as many bet sizes as you want. You just have to justify them to yourself later. Be like, hey, this is balanced by this, blah, 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 blah. Phil's talked about that in other videos, which were really great. You should check those out. So, okay. So I decided to bet between 60 and 80% of the pot. That's cool. I don't think there's a size which is, I bet, about 2/3. That's fine. I believe I go for a value bet here, which I like. And the reason is that how many queens is he really check calling the turn with here? Let's think to ourselves. I don't think very many. Because the main queen that's gonna check call here is Queen 9. That's the queen. That's the queen that check calls. Queen 5 suited 2. Those check call. That's 2 queens. He might bet flop sometimes with Queen 9 with a backdoor flush draw, and he might bet turn with it. So there's like 2 queens in his range, both of which are like somewhat heavily discounted. So this is a pretty darn good king for me, despite the fact that it makes a 4 straight. A lot of his range, I think, is going to be more on the 8 side. Like 9-8, Jack-8. And then he's going to have... I mean, the thing is, like, even like Ace-Queen, King-Queen, those are never going to play this way. Or at least very rarely. Maybe Ace-Queen sometimes. It's like so few queens that he really has here. And there's so many hands that he can play this way that are one pair on the river. Like, 10-7, Ace-9, Jack-4 suited, Jack-6 suited, Jack-7 suited, etc., etc., etc. So his range contains a lot more one pair than it contains straights. And how much 2-pair does it really have on a king that he didn't go for value with in the turn? Okay, King-Jack, that's probably betting. King-10 might check. It also might bet flop. It might bet turn. King-9, yeah, that makes sense. But I think that I can still go for a value bet here on the river, and I think because his range contains some queens, I don't want to make a huge overbet here. So I think I'm just going to end up betting like between 90 and 120. And I think I'm going to get called by worse enough to make it a good value bet. And then also, I mean, it's not like I have plenty of bluffing combos here. Any 2 clubs makes sense. I can even be bluffing with 5x if I so desire. No, I'm not betting the turn with 5x. That's crazy. No. But like Ace-8, basically any 8 makes a lot of sense. So, I think I have plenty of bluff combos, and given how weak his range is here, I mean, I could even bluff with pairs. I don't know if I'm necessarily going to, though. But yeah, I like this. I like this river bet. And, like he's going to have a queen here sometimes, but I think that I can still sneak in a bet here. And I don't think it's that thin. I think it's just good. I'm going to wait to the end of this hand, and actually, I'm going to talk about this hand on the left in the next video. So he calls, and he has King-9, so I lose. But I think it's good, because I thought he had King-9 in his range. Yes, King-9 is one of these offsuit combos that he has a lot. But I mean, look, I obviously I block the king. I mean, I think that there's plenty of weaker hands in his range, and there's plenty of bluffs in my range that the value bet's going to be winning. And I think that's a spot that people might miss. You just, if you're not following along with the hand really carefully all the way through, you might say, okay, right, so Jack 9, 5, 10, King. You can have a queen. I can't value bet this. We can have 2-pair. I gotta check 4 straight. Blah blah blah. But no, I think you can value bet there. So on that note, I'm gonna end part 2 of my 5-10 no limit 6 max zoom series. This second part of the video I'm making on the same day of the first video, so if you guys have made comments and said, you're doing a terrible job, then I haven't heard them yet, so I apologize in advance. If you think I'm doing a good job, then I'm doing more of the same. Perfect. Hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I will be back with part 3 pretty soon. Good luck at the tables.